Some of the best things about your favorite video games were created by mistake or discovered on accident. So today we're talking about 10 examples of video game glitches, bugs, and prototypes that ended up becoming important game features. Starting off with number 10, let's talk about Dying Light. Of course, you guys, if you watch the channel, you know it's one of our favorite zombie games of all time, probably one of the better spins on the whole open world zombie thing, and a lot of the game's success was thanks to its really fun parkour systems, but players know that there was also a grappling hook involved once you got further into the game. The developer in charge of the parkour, Bartosz Kulon, aka Glova, spoke to VG247, and he told VG247 that the way the grappling hook worked, the way it was kind of like this weird short-range teleportation device that would kind of skip over some parkour elements. Well, Glova said that he created it that way after an accident with his algorithms. As you can tell, like looking at the parkour in something like Dying Light 2, it's got a very different thing to it. It's more physics-based. The original Dying Light, it was more of like a workaround, and we now know that partially it feels that way and it flows in the game, or even disrupts the flow of the game a little bit, because he modeled it after the way he discovered it, as a mistake, a little goof, a whoopsie in his algorithms while working on the parkour. This is a good example to start off this list because it shows that sometimes innovation is bred out of just pure error, whether it be human or mathematical in this case. Now over at number 9, let's talk about the Konami code. Now everybody knows the Konami code. You've walked into a video game store with a bunch of overdone gamer merch. You've seen the hats, you've seen the t-shirts, you've seen the references in the video game magazines, remember those? Well, the Konami code was created by Kazuhisa Hashimoto because he was working on Gradius, and he left a debug mode in the game that allowed him to essentially test more advanced part of the game quickly, because it was just too difficult and annoying and there were no saves for him to get through when he's constantly trying to fix things. This was essentially the Konami code, but he forgot to take it out of the game, or, you know, some people say that maybe he just left it in because he thought nobody would find it, but of course it was found and the legend began. Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA. Of course, now in 2020, cheats are kind of dead. There's definitely not as many cheats in games as there used to be. We certainly miss them. We've made a lot of videos on them, but the Konami code is one that still manages to pop up, even though now it's intentional. It's usually an Easter egg, an homage to gaming history, but that little twinkle of gaming history was actually just accidentally left in a game. Whoops. Now, coming down to number 8, we have to talk about Mario's wall jump, right? Because the wall kick or wall jump is really an essential move in Mario's repertoire, like in 2020. You all know it, you've all used it. He jumps and then kicks himself off the wall, shoots in another direction, but that actually essentially started out as a glitch in the early games. According to the Mario wiki, before that it actually became a actual mechanic. The wall jump maneuver was kind of a similar thing in the old games as a glitch. To quote them, in Super Mario Brothers, if Mario lands on a wall on a 16 by 16 boundary so that his foot is on the top corner of a block, the player is able to jump from that point if they have super frame accurate timing. Other types of little jump glitches like this are in Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island. So yes, it's not essentially the 3D world type of jump kick that we're used to now, but Nintendo must have observed players taking advantage of those little glitches and then officially implemented a real wall jump mechanic in Super Mario 64. And now, honestly, we can't live without it. But moving on over to number 7, let's talk about F.E.A.R. The first-person horror shooter game is legendarily known for its incredible AI. Still to this day, the AI seems really strong and just very engaging. And now that AI was very intentional, it was not really created by a mistake. Some of the things that the AI does that makes them appear smart essentially was just the developers setting up the systems, and then the in-game characters essentially react accordingly in a way that just so happens to make it feel like another thing. I'm butchering that, it gets a little complicated to explain, so I'm going to quote a very smart and advanced research paper with information from Monolith Productions, the developers, and I quote, "Imagine we have a situation similar to what we saw earlier, where the player invalidated one of the AI's cover positions and a squad behavior orders the AI to move to the valid cover position. If there is some obstacle in the level, like a solid wall, the AI may take a back route and resurface on the player's side. It appears that the AI is flanking, but in fact, this is just a side effect of moving to the only available cover he is aware of." In another scenario, maybe the AI's cover positions are still valid, but there is cover available closer to the player, so the advanced cover squad behavior activates and each AI moves up to the next available valid cover that is nearer to the threat. If there are walls or obstacles between the AI and the player, their route to cover may lead them to come at the player from the sides. It appears as though they are executing some sort of coordinated pincher attack, when really they are just moving to nearer cover that happens to be on the either side of the player, and retreats emerge in a similar manner. So there you have it. We thought that was interesting to share. It doesn't quite fit with a lot of the other things on this list, but the way the AI systems just kind of work naturally in a way with the enemies moving up to make it appear like they're flanking you, where it's just kind of the cover system making them do the thing. It just so happened to work out really well and is part of the reason why the AI feels really, really smart. Now, next over at number 6, let's talk about Minecraft, the game that will never die. Ever. Seriously. The original creator, Notch, went on record in 2012 and essentially mentioned that the creepers, you know the creepers, everybody's favorite weird, annoying, green, exploding bastard, well, apparently those were actually a mistake. And you know what? That makes sense. They are a mistake. But Notch's quote is this. He said, "The creepers were a mistake. I don't have any modeling programs to do the models. I just write them in code. And I accidentally made them, the creepers, you know, tall instead of long. So it was like a tall thing with 4 little feet. And then that became the creeper, as opposed to a pig." So there you have it. Apparently he was working on sort of like a pig creature and ended up messing it up and creating this long abomination that is a creeper. It's funny that the creeper is kind of a representation of a coding mistake. He kind of works in the game as a glitch in the Matrix. The creeper comes for you out of nowhere, it kind of disrupts things, it destroys blocks, it ruins your plans, and that sounds honestly like any mistake in real life if you ask me. Now over at number 5, let's talk about the Tribes games and skiing. Of course, the essential way to move in these games. If you look at Tribes, you assume and you associate that movement of skiing or gliding across the ground at high speeds. Well, believe it or not, the actual act of skiing can be traced all the way back to the earliest game in the franchise. It's beta of Star Siege Tribes. Essentially in that game, getting around was more traditional, but you had a jetpack and then you had vehicles which moved much faster, but then players learned that if you abuse the geometry of the game and also spam the jump button on a steep hill, then the game would propel you forward, and thus skiing was born. It became more of a thing, especially as players and modders and hackers would go in and kind of adjust the parameters and the physics to make it even more of a thing, because it was just a fun and intense and satisfying way to move around the map. And then eventually, by the time Tribes 2 came around, skiing became an actual feature and honestly the way to move around in these games. Now over at number 4, of course, we have to talk about Civilization and Gandhi. So the Civ game pits you and other players or the AI against one another, and you all kind of represent and build up a country. They're loosely based on real historical figures, Napoleon, the Queen of England, Mayan conquerors, all types of things like that. And of course, Gandhi has always been a staple, but if you've noticed in a lot of the games, he tends to be incredibly violent. He's one of the more aggressive opponents on your map, and that is because the game embraced an old glitch. In the first Civilization game, a glitch caused Gandhi to just be a big asshole, not the peaceful, protesting Gandhi that we all know from history. Apparently there was an error with the numbers from the original game, where Gandhi was set with the lowest aggression rate, 1 out of 10, because of course he was known in history as being a pacifist. But early players would know that once you got further in the game and you unlocked democracy and things progressed, a switch would flip and Gandhi would become an incredibly violent player. And now, fast forwarding to 2020, Gandhi is a legend in the franchise for occasionally nuking you, which is really hilarious and terrible. But that's the way it goes. The Civ developers have kind of rolled with it and kind of kept it a thing, just because it was such a charming and weird glitch parameter in the original game that you can't help but laugh. Now down to number 3, there's no denying that Street Fighter is one of the most important fighting game series ever, and Street Fighter 2 is one of the best fighting games ever. But did you know that Street Fighter 2's combo system, the major part of the game, was actually an unintended bug? There was a bug on the car smashing bonus stage where you could get in 2 attacks that counted as the same attack, which is technically a combo, and it was something you could pull off during a fight. Seeing that this was a multiplayer game and that bug could technically break the game if someone had figured out how to exploit it, they had to decide whether or not they should fix it. ultimately, they decided on leaving it in because they thought players would have to have a perfect timing to actually pull this stuff off. Of course, little did they know that gamers are crazy and actually spent a lot of time in arcades actually mastering this bug and developing a skill. After seeing how much people really dug this combo, Capcom decided to make it official and work it into upcoming versions of the game as an actual gameplay mechanic, starting with Super Street Fighter 2. See, sometimes mistakes just turn into something really cool. I bet the dude who accidentally spilled peanut butter in his chocolate was just as hyped as the Street Fighter 2 development team. Now down to number 2, we have to talk about Grand Theft Auto, specifically the very first game. Before it was GTA, it was actually a top-down multiplayer racing game that encouraged crashing. But developed by DMA Design, it was expected to take 18 months to complete. But during the development, they started to transition this game called Race and Chase into the first Grand Theft Auto game. Obviously the right move, because look at Grand Theft Auto now. But yeah, the appeal, one of the things that makes GTA as huge as it is, I would say, is the craziness, the open world chaos, the crime, the car chases, getting your wanted level up and messing with the cops till they start to ram you off the road. This iconic gameplay mechanic was actually a glitch. It was discovered by playtesters who, during playtests, would ditch the then very linear story setup to drive around and mess with the cops because they discovered a glitch that caused the police AI to attempt to ram them off the road. During Race and Chase and the early Grand Theft Auto days, that wasn't the intention, but they found it and it was cool and fun. Because it seems like DMA Design paid attention to those playtesters and kept that in the game. And now I'm sure we're all glad they did. It's a brilliant discovery. And now, honestly, that's what a lot of people go to Grand Theft Auto for. Now down to number 1, we have Warframe. In a previous big Warframe update entitled Echoes of the Sentient, they introduced a Parkour 2.0 system. Now, for those who don't know, in Warframe you play as a space ninja who can zip around all quick-like, and the Parkour 2.0 update made that a little easier to do. And before this update, players made use of a trick called coptering, which was kind of a bug with the game's physics systems and how it works with attacks. You would sprint into a slide attack with a fast melee weapon and it would propel you forward. Think of it like swinging a sword to move faster in Destiny, the sword jump launch forward thing in Sea of Thieves, or even bunny hopping in old school FPS games. It's really more of a way to get around and not like a game-breaking bug, but it was annoying to do and required you to hit 4 buttons or keys to pull it off, and then it was useful. In the Parkour 2.0 update, the developers added something called bullet jump, which is essentially coptering but is activated with a 2-button prompt instead of 4. The Warframe game director, Steve Sinclair, described it as ninja speed with 50% less carpal tunnel. Anyway, this is actually pretty cool of the Warframe developers to do, and a lot of examples on this list are the same. Embracing little tricks, little bugs, little exploits, and a lot of these games are probably better for it. Now, of course, there are so many more examples out there of things like this. Bugs that became features, player-implemented tricks that became real game features. So we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What are some of your favorite examples? If you enjoyed this video though, and maybe learned something, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. And if you're new, consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell because we put out videos every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.